Trying to predict the winner of Survivor 48 has been one of the most chaotic seasons in a long time. The Edgic community is all over the place. And now that I finally lost my streak of correct boot predictions, I'm going to have to piece together all of these contrasting thoughts from the community to create a cohesive video on my analysis of the edit of episode 9 and the future of the season. But first, if you don't know how Edgic works or you don't know what an Edgic rating is, basically Edgic is just a system of analyzing the edit of every single character in a single episode of a reality TV competition show and giving them each a rating based on the type of edit they had in order to predict who might be the winner of the season and how far each person will go. There are 3 different parts to an Edgic rating. The first part is the type of edit. It can either be UTR, which stands for under the radar, which means you didn't see very much of them. It can be MOR, which stands for middle of the road. You saw a decent amount of them, but they weren't super fleshed out as a character. They can be CP, which stands for complex personality. You saw a good amount of them, and they were very fleshed out as a character. Or it can be over the top, otherwise known as OTT, which means you saw way too much of them. And they basically became a characterized version of themselves. The next part is the tone of the edit. It can either be P for a positive leaning edit, N for a negative leaning edit, M for mixed, means there was a little bit of positive and a little bit of negative, or it can be no letter at all for just a neutral tone, no tone, nothing leaning one way or the other. And finally, the number in every Edgic rating is basically just a visibility scale from 1 to 5 on how much they were in the episode. 1 for you barely saw any of them, 5 for you saw a lot of them. And so, with all that said, it's time to get into general thoughts on the episode. I gotta say, wow, big shock, crazy week this week to see David go out. I was wrong last week. I said it would be Mary, and it did look like it was leaning towards Mary at the beginning of the episode. And then we got a big blindside on David, which, to give my honest thoughts, hashtag justice for David. I know that people, weren't rooting for him on Twitter and whatever, but he was right. The dude was completely right. I think that his game plan on how he wanted to go to the end was actually really good based on his personality and his type of person that he is. And all of his reads on what other people were doing and up to were completely accurate. I think David did everything, all of his plans and reads were completely correct. Now, he did not do everything right. I think that he let his social game slip a little bit, and he was just generally ticking people off, he wasn't able to express his thoughts in a way that was convincing to people. He wasn't good at convincing people to see his side or want to side with him in the argument, even though he was right. He was right, and I said this last week, and I'll say it again. He was right. Kyle and Shauhin were trying to form secret bonds with Kamilla that weren't out in the open. And the big difference, I know a lot of people have called him hypocrite, but the big difference with what he was doing with Mary is that he told everyone. It was very out in the open that Mary was with him, and he said, hey guys, Mary wants to be a part of the alliance. This is an open thing that was out there for everyone to see. Whereas Kyle and Shauhin were trying to form this side secret thing with Kamilla, but they weren't telling the rest of the alliance what they were doing or that they were trying to bring her in. They never said that Camilla's part of the alliance. They just said, Camilla's not part of the alliance. We're not with her, but we're not willing to vote her out, which was sus AF, and David was completely right to call it out. Justice for David. I really think that he got boned over here, and they dunked on him so bad in the edit, even though I think that he was right. And I gotta say, the dunking in the edit is very interesting to me, especially when trying to predict where people will go from here. Because realistically, it makes it seem like Joe and Eva were right for ending up turning on David. The edit was clearly trying to paint David in a very negative light in this instance. But really, I feel like strategy gameplay wise, I think it was a really bad move. I don't think they should have turned on him. I have no idea. There was no good reason. Really, no good reason for Joe and Eva to turn on David here. I think it was a terrible idea. But I don't think the edit framed it that way, which is very interesting to see where that might go for Joe and Eva moving forward. As for David, big send-off. Honestly, I'm sad to lose him. I know a lot of people weren't huge David fans out there, but I know that there are a lot of people that are David fans. I wouldn't say I was like the biggest David fan, but I do think that he got gaslit. He was completely right, and I think he deserves justice in that situation. So, as for David's rating in this episode, this was pointed out to me in the comments at one point. I believe in maybe David's very first confessional in the first episode of the season. He talks about a speech where he says he is a stuntman and he's played both heroes and villains, and he could end up being the hero or the villain. Who's to say? He doesn't know where it's going to go. And that was a very interesting confessional. A few weeks ago, somebody pointed that out to me, and I thought that was a very interesting confessional to catch on to. And I think that's exactly what happened. David was the hero. He wanted to be a hero, but the edit ended up portraying him as the villain. He became the villain. And so that confessional, I think, was a very interesting allusion to this. I had David locked in for Final 3. I thought David was losing finalist for sure, and a lot of people did. So this was a really shocking to lose David here. But now that David is gone, I find it hard to not give him what I believe to be an OTT negative 5. So much David, so much just dunking on David. It was a very David-centric episode. And last week, I ended up changing it to a negative tone afterward. I still wanted to give it mixed. This time, it's inarguable. The edit wanted you to root for the people that were trying to get David out. Even though I kind of got pissed at people. I got pissed at Kamilla and Kyle and even Eva and Joe for saying that David is paranoid and that he's an idiot. He's not an idiot, okay? Maybe he's being a bit of an a-hole or a jackass or a little bit condescending. Okay, those would maybe be reasonable. But an idiot, he certainly was not. He was right. And him being paranoid was not true because he was right. And I gotta say, his exit was powerful. That was one of the more powerful exits I've seen in a while. That was intense to see him just really glance at people and feel so heartbroken because I think he really saw the writing on the wall and just nobody would believe him. And so, unfortunately, however, I do think that the edit framed it as David's going crazy. He's paranoid, yada, 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 which I don't think is the reality of the situation, but I do think is the reality of the edit. So, an OTT negative 5 for David in this episode, I think is appropriate. Which means we're going to jump up to the top of the ratings, which is now Eva at the top of the ratings, and go down alphabetically for everybody's ratings for the episode. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to say this was a wildly off-kilter edit in terms of who got content and who didn't. The edit basically is telling us of the 4 people that are left, there are 4 people that you should care about. Of the 8 people that are left, there are 4 people you should care about and 4 people that you shouldn't. We saw an absolute unbelievable ton of a select few people in this episode and barely any at all of the other people. So for Eva, I don't know if there was tone in Eva's edit this week. I think, it could be leaning positive because she's, wants to like keep people together and she's like the mediator. Honestly, I think maybe it is positive tone for Eva this week. but it didn't feel super strong. But we did see people say, Shauhin ended up saying that he trusted her. Obviously we see Joe saying time and time again how much he trusts her. I kind of want to give her a normal, just a standard complex personality, but I'm gonna give it another 5 because there was so much Eva. She had 16 confessionals in this episode. If we take a look at the charts here, 16 confessionals for Eva. That's an absolute ton. So I'm thinking a complex personality 5. This episode may be a positive. However, as we move on to Joe, I think I have very similar thoughts on a huge episode for Joe. By far his biggest and best episode. Maybe not best episode, but his biggest episode yet. And I feel like this is another very positive toned episode for Joe. We saw Kyle and saying multiple times again how much he trusts Joe, how Joe is so trustworthy, he's so honest, he won't go back on his word, how he wants to stick with his people. I'm thinking maybe a complex personality positive 5. Honestly, Joe. I feel like again this was a huge Joe episode, and like I said, I think there are going to be a lot of people getting 5s this episode, and a lot of people getting very low numbers this episode. So that's how I'm feeling so far on that. But I'm open to change on the tones on those people. As for Kamilla, well, not another really bad episode for Kamilla. I'm thinking an under the radar too, honestly. Maybe an under the radar negative, just because again, I just feel like her, I feel like we saw more of her berating David and calling him names than we saw David doing that to her, and listen, I know people are rooting for Kamilla, and I mean, I like Kamilla too, but I just feel like I sided with David here. I'm sorry. But I do think that might be a little bit of bias, so I think no tone here. But otherwise, one confessional in this episode, really not a lot here from Kamilla. She just was not shown to not be very important in this vote, even though she should have been, which is so absurd. So, that's that. Kyle. I think, honestly, I'm going to copy this same thing I gave to Joe. I think this is another 5 for Kyle. A huge, huge, huge episode for Kyle. So much focus on him. I think I would lean positive because they really positively framed his whole backstory package. Not package, but his whole backstory that he explained to Joe as like a positive, sympathetic thing. And otherwise, so much content. We really were meant to be shown that Kyle was in the right in this situation against David, even though I don't think he was. That was what the edit was telling us, in my opinion. So I'm thinking a complex personality positive 5 for Kyle. Mary. Wow. What a bad episode for Mary. I am thinking, I don't use this very often. I think I gotta go with an under the radar negative, because I do think this was a negative tone episode. People were, not talking well about Mary, but we didn't hear from Mary at all. In fact, I might even give it. Do I give it a 1? I might give it a 1 because she had 0. Because she literally, if we look at the charts, she had 0 confessionals. That's absurd. She should have been so present in this episode, and yet she wasn't. And she didn't even get to talk at Tribal that much. So, not a good episode for Mary. Mitch. One scene, pretty much. Mitch got to talk about giving swimming lessons to Star. And then we also got the one thing of Mitch throwing out David's name, but he barely got any credit for it. Honestly, I'm thinking another under the radar 2 here. This is Mitch's first under the radar, but I just felt like where was he? Why wasn't he more present? Maybe you could argue middle of the road for Mitch here, but honestly, I felt like the contrast between the top people and the bottom people was so strong in this episode that it really made Mitch feel not super important. Shauhin, I'm thinking a mixed tone. I'm thinking I might copy this rating I gave him in episode 7, actually. The Contenders person I mixed 4. Lesser than the other 4 people that I think were the 5s. You could even maybe argue Shauhin a 3, because I do think he was there. He was pretty present, but it wasn't as focused, I think, as the other people were. But he did get significant scenes that we will talk about when we get to the Contender Rankings. But otherwise, yeah, I think a 4 is good. And I think mixed tone on Shauhin because he was shown kind of negatively in that, like, his sussing out of Eva was not shown to be like, it's kind of like, it kind of dunked on him a little bit when he was trying to suss out Eva when she went on her journey. But then he also gets credit for the David vote and positive attributes there. So I'm thinking a mixed tone. Star, I think I gotta copy the same thing as Mitch. Again, we got the one swimming scene, and that was about it. Barely, they felt like not a presence in the episode. I was shocked we even got that swimming scene because it was something that they didn't get otherwise. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that. And that's the ratings. I feel like kind of straightforward, I guess, maybe this week. Maybe I went too far extremes, and I would love to hear people's opinions on that. But I really feel like there was so much of the select few, really the strong 5 got so much, and everyone that wasn't the strong 5 got so little. There was just a really big discrepancy there. And that's why I give the ratings that I do. So, let's move on to the Contender Rankings to attempt to figure out the contenders. So, staying in dead last, I am keeping Mary. I don't think a whole lot of things are going to change a whole lot this week. I think that this was, again, a really bad episode for Mary. Another zero confessional episode. It's super rare to get 2 zero confessional episodes, especially 2 during the merge. That's really bad. This could have been a big episode for her. She was very involved. Her number 1 ally goes out again. When Say gets voted out, she gets 0 confessionals. And now when David gets voted out, she gets 0 confessionals. The best thing that I can think for Mary's edit is that maybe they're trying to shield her a little bit in that, these people are getting voted out, or, Say and David both kind of negatively painted villains on their way out, and they want to not tie Mary to that. Maybe, but really you should be giving her something and let her explain her thoughts, why she's working with these people and why she's doing the things she is, and we're just not seeing that at all. And I have no idea where Mary goes from here. I mean, what is Mary if not Say's rival? And what is Mary if not David's partner / sidekick, based on the way the edit presented it? Now she's just got no story, no tack, nothing going on personally in the edit. Listen, I mean, Mary, I like Mary, okay? And I know a lot of people really like Mary. I think she is funny, but man, her edit is really bad. That's all I'm talking about here. And I know it's controversial maybe to put Mary below Star, but I am, because I'm putting Star above, because at least Star's positively under the radar, whereas Mary is negatively under the radar. In fact, I could even maybe give Star an under the radar positive this episode based on her swimming thing. In fact, you know what? This is controversial. I almost never do this. I'm hopping back to the Edgic Ratings, and I'm giving her an under the radar positive. I don't even know if I've done that yet. But I think that's fair for Star. We got to see her swimming. That's something. Bam. Positive. But yeah, I mean, Star's not winning. The Star and Mary are the 2 that can be easily counted out. Now, as for these other 6, I think that there have been a lot of people in the Edgic community that have made very good points for the viability of any of these 6 players. And it's very difficult to try to piece together everything. This season is so all over the place. I feel like by this time, by now, it's so obvious that Rachel was winning. The rankings were very obvious. But now it's like, man, I really don't know. And it's not even like Survivor 43 with Gabler, where it was like people were just wrong, but they were at least confident. With this, there's so little confidence. It just feels like it's so up in the air. It's really difficult to predict, honestly. However, I am keeping Kamilla at 3rd from the bottom, and I feel at this point very good about this. I think this is another bad episode for Kamilla. Really bad. Another episode where Kyle and Kamilla are supposed to be this dynamic duo, and yet Kyle gets 8 trillion billion tons of content, and Kamilla gets 1. It was awful edit for Kamilla. She should have gotten so much credit for this move, and she didn't. Camilla's post-merge edit has been astronomically worse than Kyle's pre-merge edit. And I know that people discount Kyle because of his pre-merge, but Kyle's pre-merge looks unbelievably good compared to Camilla's post-merge. I just think at this point, I can respect an under the radar edit for a winner, but Camilla's is just, it's really gone down the drain. I would be surprised if Kamilla climbed back up in my rankings, but you never know. We'll move forward. I think that there are, the Kamilla believers. I respect it. I like Kamilla, right? She was high on my charts for a long time. I was really looking forward to her in the season, but man, her edit is not good. I'm keeping Mitch at the next spot at number 5. I don't even know about Mitch. There are some absolutely kooky, crazy Mitch truthers out there in the Edgic community. And you know what? I see it a lot more than I see it for Kamilla. Maybe. I think Mitch could have absolutely bizarre bonkers under the radar, winner's edit. He's gotten some positivity, right? He's gotten more positivity than Kamilla, and he's been slightly more consistent. He's also been on the outs and hasn't been able to do much, so him not getting very much content makes more sense. And honestly, I feel like we have a better understanding of his relationships with people than Kamilla. We know Kamilla likes Kyle, and that's it. And that Shauhin likes Kamilla, but she doesn't like Shauhin, I guess. I mean, her relationships are so poor. Mitch, we don't really see a lot of his relationships either, but it's better than Kamilla. The people that think Mitch is getting a Rachel edit, good on ya. Rachel had way better content by this point in the season than Mitch has had. But, he did still have a really good episode a couple episodes ago. So, maybe. But honestly, I'm seeing Mitch more as a losing finalist than I'm seeing a winner. Now, just for shits and gigs, I'm going to do a little bit of an edit here. I'm putting Shauhin at 4. Sorry everyone. Sorry all my Shauhin truthers out there. I gotta go with my gut. I gotta go with just really how I'm feeling right now. And it's just a bizarre episode for Shauhin, and Shauhin's edit is so bizarre. Sorry, Ren Davis out there, if you're watching. I know you're a big Shauhin truther, but I feel like Shauhin got 2 major segments in this episode. One really good and one really bad. The second of which, of course, was Shauhin getting the montage of him planting the seeds to get David out, and it gives him a bunch of credit potentially for this vote that I didn't feel like he was that important in otherwise. So that seems like that should be really good for him, right? Like maybe Rachel got stuff like that last season. A flashback sequence seemed like a great thing for a winner's edit. And that was what sealed the deal for Rachel being the winner last season. However, the other scene of Shauhin in this episode was him trying to wake up Joe to tell him about Eva, going out and then, going on the journey advantage thing. And before Shauhin enters the equation in that scene, there's like really intense, cool music. And then all of a sudden, if you pay attention, Shauhin goes to wake up Joe. And we get what I think I have to call dodo music. This is dodo music here.
That's what I think is happening tonight. So, boom. Game on.
So, I'm laying there asleep.
It's like do 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 do. It's what? This should be a really intense, serious scene, and yet it's like it's played off as like Joe being like, whatever, Shauhin, bug off. Let me go back to sleep. You're being a doofus. You're being a bit of a goofball right now.
He's staring into my eyes, and he's like, shh.
And then we see the next segment, and then the next day, Eva tells them about the advantage. Joe is like, yeah, I was right, basically implying Shauhin was wrong. And Shauhin's like, oh yeah, I guess I was wrong. I trust Eva 100% now. I'm not going to target her. Huh? That was such a dodo scene for Shauhin. I went through this episode thinking this is a terrible episode for Shauhin until you got that montage. And so I can only reconcile where Shauhin's edit is going in potentially two ways. One way is that if he is comparable to any like new era winner edit, I think the best I can compare him to at this point is Gabler, someone that's painted a bit of a doof sometimes, maybe not playing as good as you think they would be, but also like is given a lot of credit for good moves. They get the dodo music, but they do make good moves, and they do get really good strategic content when they do show up, and then they somehow win despite being kind of a goof, which I just find so strange because I don't think that Shauhin needs to be a goof. He seems like a very savvy player, realistically, so why is the edit making him seem like such a doof? I don't know. I mean, with Gabler, it felt very inherent, but with Shauhin, it feels very purposeful, and I don't get it. So the only other thing I can justify is that Shauhin is getting some kind of like teeny Jake style edit, maybe even a little bit of Jesse, in the sense that Teeny also got a lot of flashback sequences and whatnot when the bag kind of fired. There was a big sequence. Jake, of course, obviously had the infamous flash forward sequence. That was a really big edit moment for him, and he doesn't win. Jesse had like his like rules of a blindside or something like that, like an instruction manual. That was a big edit thing. He doesn't win. So I can only think that Shauhin is going kind of on the path of one of those people, maybe a fire-making loser, maybe a losing finalist. And it's trying to tell us that Shauhin is good, but also he's not that good, and this is why he falls just short at the end. I think Drew Basile has made the comparison to Teeny a lot, and I kind of see it. That's where I'm feeling about Shauhin right now. That's just where my gut's at. I still am in on a Loggy winner. I really am. And I do still think that Shauhin could very well win. But his edit is just so bizarre, and it has so much more like active negatives to it than the other three, that I feel like the negatives of their edits are more like passive negatives, whereas Shauhin's negatives are much more like in your face, that I have to put Shauhin at 4. But he's still obviously 800 leagues above the people below him. And I'm putting Kyle at 3. I just don't want to put Kyle higher. I really don't, because I really think Alagi is winning. I just think that Lagi's gotten so much more complexity than Siva. I've always thought that Lagi is going to win. But I really think that this was a great episode for Kyle, and I really think that it kind of solved a lot of problems that people have had with Kyle's edit for some time. He finally gets his personal content. We hear about his backstory, his real life struggles and whatnot. And that is something that people have really complained about Kyle's edit for a long time. I think that Kyle's kind of mediocre pre-merge, I feel like, has been totally justified by this point by having a really stellar post-merge. And I don't think his pre-merge was so bad to ever count him out. It just wasn't as good as other people, which is why he was lower in my rankings. But now his edit is so good that, I mean, by proxy, his pre-merge doesn't seem, it's not that big of a deal. His premiere is fine. If he wins, it's circumstantial, but it's still good, right? So I think Kyle could win. And if it is a Siva, I definitely am leaning towards Kyle. But I still am in on a laggy win, realistically. So, all that being said, I'm going to put Joe at number 2. Really, my gut is telling me I got to keep Eva at number 1. And I know that people have been a little bit all over the place in terms of this episode for Eva. And I'm going to come to Eva's defense here, okay? Because I am of the opinion that this was a good episode for Eva. And some people say that this episode goes against her story. She's supposed to be trustworthy, and she was with, David and Mary were with her, but she goes against them. That's terrible for her. Gameplay-wise, I agree. I don't think she should have voted out David. I think at best, she should have pushed them to vote out Mary instead of David. No way that Joe or Eva should have voted out David here. However, they're still painted as being in the right and being like the heroes and, doing the right thing for cutting David. That's what the edit is telling us. Gameplay-wise, I disagree with the move. But edit-wise, they still get so much credit and so much focus and goodness for making that decision, if that makes sense. I also think, in terms of Eva's story, she has a quote, I think, like, very close to the end of the episode, right before they go to Tribal, where Eva says something along the lines of, I trust that David and Mary are with me, but I don't trust that they are with my people. And that is the key phrase that I think a lot of people are missing, is that Eva's story is about her people and keeping her people together. And that one moment excised David and Mary from being her people, right? She showed that they are not trusted to be with her people. She cares about her people, assumingly her people being Shauhin and Joe, and I guess maybe Kyle. But it is not her going against her people that are David and Mary, because she explicitly says David and Mary are not with my people. And so she even went against maybe what was better for her own personal game, to stick and trust with her people. And that is why I think that this was a good episode for Eva, and why I do still firmly have her as my number 1 contender at this point. I think she's had the most consistent edit and the most understandable edit. Now, would her edit make a lot of sense if she loses? Yes. But I think if anyone's got an edit that has the least flaws that could potentially win, I think it's Eva at this point, especially with my laggy truther beliefs. Now, Joe comes in at number 2. I am worried for Joe. I am. But generally, I just think that the Eve and Joe relationship has been so at the forefront, and so, at this point, so the main... It just feels like it's the main heart of the season at this point, in a way that, like, Kyle and Kamilla could be, but Kamilla gets no content. Whereas Joe and Eva both get content. We see them talking together a lot and strategizing a lot and figuring out what they want to do. That is the core relationship of the season. And that's why I feel like if it's not Eva, then I feel like it's Joe. Now, I am leaning Eva, and I do think Joe is more likely to get voted out soon than Eva is. But if Eva does get voted out, then Joe might be my number 1 contender, which is why I feel fine at leaving Joe at number 2 for now. And I also want to come a little bit to defense of Joe's edit. I've seen people, really discount him as a potential winner. And, you know, a lot of it being like his visibility. Obviously, his zero confessional episode, not great for his edit. And I did not like that at the time. But I thought about it for a moment. And I thought, okay, who in the new era would Joe's winner edit be the most comparable to? Probably D. In terms of gameplay style, they have both been very, controlling, very dominant players. Joe has pretty much been at the top, really deciding a lot of votes so far. That's pretty much where D was. And so I thought, okay, let's compare where Joe has been at to where D has been at. So here is the confessional charts for last week for episode 8 for Survivor 45. D, as we can see, of course, this is also 90-minute episodes. So the stats should be, even. They should be fairly played against each other. D, 25 confessionals as of episode 8. A minus 16% edit, thanks to Rob's fact checker on Twitter and Survivor Fact Checker on Instagram for these charts. So that is where we at. And D, third from the bottom. Third from the bottom, okay, in terms of confessional count. That's pretty low. I feel like people forget about this. And, I mean, D was a pretty obvious, not the most obvious, but someone that, was maybe like number 2 for most of the season, right? It was D and Emily. But it really seemed like D was going to win. But she's third from the bottom at this point of episode 8 with 25 confessionals. Now, let's take a look at Joe as of episode 8. Joe, third from the bottom. Third from the bottom, 24 confessionals. One less than D. Basically on par as of episode 8. That kind of blew my mind a little bit when I saw those stats, right? If Joe is similar to any new era winner in terms of gameplay style, it's D in his dominance and control of a very loyal alliance. And he has almost the same confessional stats. Now, obviously, there's a lot more complexity to edit than this. But this is just one defense that I'm trying to make onto why I think that Joe should still be considered a contender. And even if you look at, if we go back to, here's episode, this is the end, episode 9, which is this week's episode. So D, still third from the bottom, 30 confessionals now. And look who's below her. Jake, also one of the 3 finalists, right? And someone that was really the only person that seemed like they could have a resistance against D's alliance, right? He was never like the biggest contender, but I feel like he was probably the number 2 contender after Emily went out. And yet, look how low they are as of episode 9. Now, let's look at this week's confession charts, episode 9 for Joe. Joe has surpassed D. D was at 30 confessionals. Joe is now at 33. And he's way higher up in the ranks. He's moved from third from the bottom up to 5th from the bottom, right? Which is 2 spots higher than where D was as of episode 9. So, all that being said, I think that a lot of things that are discrediting to Joe, I don't think are that bad. I think they are in line. I still think Joe has a absolutely fantastic premiere episode, and I can see, in terms of his visibility, being in line with where D was at around this time in Survivor 45. So I don't think Joe's edit is as good as D or as obvious of a potential winner, but I don't want to discredit him because I do think he has, clear storylines. People think that he's going to get voted out because of him saying he's willing to go home for Eva. But here's the thing: if Joe wins, what, you're going to cut that out? That's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing to show his relationships and how good of a guy he is. If he wins, I think you still put that in, right? I still think it's possible. Now, again, gameplay-wise, I think Eva and Joe are in a way worse spot than they were last week. But edit-wise, I still think that they have the best edits. As a duo and Loggy as a trio, minus Star, sorry Star, have really the best edits. And I really think the winner is likely from that group. Maybe a wild Kyle win, or maybe a really wild Mitch win. And that's where I'm at. So that is the rankings for this week. No, this is me trying to piece together a lot of craziness that I've been hearing and try to come to defense of just what my gut feeling has been about where the edits have been at. Otherwise, that's about it for the Contender Rankings. So we can talk about predictions for the future of the season. Quite frankly, I don't have a whole lot new to say about the predictions this week that I haven't already said before. I feel like we're in a really weird spot where, again, there's the four people that are the remnants of the strong five that are important, and four people that weren't in the strong five that are not important at all. Really unimportant. Maybe we'll get a crazy wild Mitch win, but other than that, just abysmal edits for all of those people. And so last week I was wrong. I expected Mary to go out, but I also did have the suspicion that it seemed like we were kind of due for a bigger character to get voted out after losing Chrissy the week before. And so it's not that surprising to me to lose David. I didn't think it would be David. I thought maybe it would be Shauhin or Kamilla if we were to lose a slightly bigger character. But losing David, I guess, makes sense based on like the flow of going back and forth in the edit of a season. You want like kind of complexity and variance to an edit. You don't want to just have all the biggest characters go to the end. I mean, you can, but usually there's differences there. And also if we look at like winners edits, we can look at over the past here. Typically you want variance. And I think like with David, he didn't have a whole lot of variance. It was like a lot of David all the time, right? Similar to Say, a lot all the time. And a lot all the time isn't actually a good sign for longevity. Typically you want that variance. You want that complexity in your edit that they didn't have. And you don't want low all the time either. Like Chrissy, who was pretty much always low. And so that wasn't surprising to lose her either. So, at this point, I feel like I think it's more likely that we lose one of the small four, basically, next week. I'd be surprised to lose David and another one of the strong five back-to-back, just edit-wise. Gameplay-wise, it seems like the people on the outs should be able to mount a resistance, basically, against the Logi 3. And I don't think it's impossible. I could see one of the Logi 3 going out. The preview tried to make it seem like it was going to be Joe, but I kind of have a hard time believing it. I just think that's a little on the nose. I wouldn't be surprised if gameplay-wise it ended up being Joe, and I could see Eva going on like a revenge tour if Joe gets voted out. It's possible. But I also don't know. I don't know why Kyle would be willing to vote out Joe, especially over Shauhin. I feel like it seems way more likely. We've heard time and time again how much Kyle trusts Joe. We've gone around in circles, and this has been my kind of complaint about the season, and I get why. I'm starting to get a little bit more of like why people are frustrated this season. It feels like we're going so in circles of seeing the same relationships. We see Kyle go to Kamilla and be like, oh, I gotta go to Kamilla. She's my strategist partner. We're the most secret alliance in the game. We are running the game and nobody knows it. Every episode, bam, 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 hammer you over the head with it. And then Kyle goes to Joe and he's like, I actually really trust Joe. Joe's always been straightforward and honest with me. And then Joe goes to Eva and Joe's like, Eva's my number one. Everything I do's gotta go through Eva. Me and her, we're always gonna work together. And it's just this same repeated stuff over and over and over again. I get it. I get that these people are close. What are the relationships between anybody else? I have no idea. And so it's starting to frustrate me a little bit. I'll be honest. I get it. However, that repeated cycle just makes me think that those people in the outs edit so bad, like it's not even realistic at this point for like Star to be a losing finalist, because I know she has no shot. It's not even possible. It's impossible at this point. Her edit's so bad. So I just it's difficult. This episode has kind of broke me a little bit. I don't know. I don't even know what really to think, other than I do think if Kyle were to turn on the Loggies, I feel like he would want to go for Shauhin. So maybe like Mitch wants out Joe, but then Kyle says, if I'm gonna flip to you guys, it's gotta be Shauhin. Can't be Joe. It's possible. I would be surprised if Kyle is willing to vote out Joe. Otherwise, I think it'll somehow be someone on the outs. Maybe Mary goes back to the strong four, or Kamilla votes with them. Something's got to give here, because it would be surprising. It's not impossible, but it would be surprising to see one of those people go out next week. Otherwise, I could see, maybe some crazy resistance happens where the three people on the outs and the Loggy three come together and say, hey, Kyle and Kamilla have been playing the star. They're playing the middle. Let's get one of them out. Maybe. It's unlikely. But it's just, I'm throwing out hypotheticals here. But realistically, I think Kyle and Kamilla should be fine. I think Eva's probably fine. So it's probably Joe or Shauhin or one of those other three on the outs. In terms of attempting to predict Star's longevity, Star's edit's been so bad. It's really been so bad. It's kind of giving to me at this point, like either like an 8th or 7th or maybe a 5th place vote out. I feel like 6th place is often a much more important character, and then like 4th place is a pretty important character, and the final 3 are important in some way. Like 5th place can be someone that's a little bit more under the radar. 7th place is also a good spot to send out someone that like wasn't as important to the narrative. 8th place, I think, is also fine because you're far enough out at this point. So, there was a deleted scene this week of Star going to Joe and Shauhin and basically asking them who the final 3s are, and they basically like, don't give her anything. She's like, they didn't pass, they failed the test because they didn't give me the final 3. I know they're thinking of the final 3, and I just couldn't help but think, like, if this scene is cut, how is Star going to the final 3? Like, shouldn't this be a sign that Star is going to the final 3 if this were in there? And it being cut, it's just, I do not like her chances of even being a losing finalist at this point. Even if you didn't put it in this episode, you could put it in last week or put it in next week. You could have used that scene in some way. And so I think it's possible we lose Star next week. I think it's possible we lose Mitch. I'm much higher on Mitch's possibilities of losing finalist. I've been saying that for a while. I think they want to build up Mitch as a potential winner, but he's not really going to win. But like, it feels like maybe, and that's why, that's a little bit of tension for the final 3. Honestly, I kind of think Joe and Mitch might be in the final 3 together, and that's why we heard Joe talking about how big of a threat Mitch was a couple weeks ago, was because there's going to be a little bit of tension there. Like, maybe Mitch could beat Joe in the final 3. I don't think it probably would happen, but it's possible. And so really that just leaves me with Mary again. And I hate to use the same prediction again, but I just kind of think, I don't really know how Mary gets voted out. I don't know why Mary gets voted out. I don't know why the numbers would get pushed onto voting Mary out at this point, but I just, edit-wise, Mary is so in a hole. I think it's probably Star or Mary somehow. Maybe they do an easy vote on Star, or somehow the numbers get crazy on Mary because Mary is like maybe playing the middle and she seems like a threat in some way, and so they decide to vote her out. I I don't know. I mean, I know people have been thinking Mary's fire-making loser. It's possible, but man, her edit is, whew. Sorry, Mary. Love you, but man. So yeah, I think I just have to go with Mary again as the boot prediction. I would say Star is my backup. And yeah, it could be Joe. Could be Kamilla. I don't know. But at this point, yeah, that's where I'm at. I think Mayor's getting voted out. I think Mitch is losing finalist. I don't know who the other losing finalist is at this point. Honestly, I've been joking about it. Joe, Eva, Mitch, final three. It doesn't seem impossible to me, honestly. I also could see Shauhin at this point as a losing finalist potentially. I don't think Kyle will be a losing finalist. Maybe Kyle could be like a Sam, but I don't know who the Rachel is then. I guess maybe Eva, if it's Kyle and Eva in the final three. That seems kind of realistic. Like maybe Kyle and Eva are kind of like a Charlie Kenzie circumstance. That's possible. It's possible. I don't see Kamilla making the final three at this point. I think she's a dragon that's going to get taken out. And yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts. Crazy week. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a whole lot else to say. I'm kind of, this week kind of drained me, man. I put a lot of thought juice into thinking about what the heck was going on with the edit this week. I just think that a lot of people's edits are all over the place, and it makes this season really fun because it's really exciting. I've read a lot of people's opinions on the Edgic Reddit page on what they think is going to happen, and there's so many contrasting opinions. So please, if you have any opinions on anything I got right or anything you think I got wrong, let me know in the comments below. Press that subscribe button so that you can see next week's video talk about episode 10. And yeah, I'd love to hear what people are thinking. If you agree with me, if you don't, it's been super fun. This has been a super fun season to cover, as chaotic as it has been. And that's pretty much all I have to say. So I will see you all next week talking about episode 10. I have been North. Stay frosty, y'all.